Christmas Eve, 2008. In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Covina, California, the Ortega family gathered for their annual holiday celebration. The tree was lit, the gifts were piled high, and laughter echoed through the house as children played and adults exchanged warm holiday greetings. But outside, under the glow of the twinkling lights, a man in a Santa Claus suit was making his way to their door. He wasn't carrying presents. What happened next would shock an entire community, leave 9 family members dead, and reveal a story of heartbreak, revenge, and unimaginable violence. This wasn't just a crime. It was a tragedy that would forever change the meaning of Christmas for one family and anyone who heard their story. What could drive someone to such unspeakable actions on the most joyous night of the year? This is the chilling tale of Bruce Pardo, the man who turned a festive gathering into a nightmare. To understand how that fateful Christmas Eve came to be, we need to go back to the life of Bruce Jeffrey Pardo. Here's the story of Bruce, an inside look at the science behind depression. Bruce wasn't the kind of man anyone would expect to be at the center of a tragedy. Born in 1963, he grew up in the sunny suburbs of California. Friends described him as intelligent, even charming at times. He had a natural aptitude for technology, which led him to pursue a career as an electrical engineer. With his technical skills and his stable income, Bruce appeared to have the makings of a successful, ordinary life. By the mid-2000s, Bruce was living in the San Fernando Valley. He was personable, seemingly grounded, and working in a field that provided him with both financial security and a sense of pride. But beneath that facade of stability, Bruce harbored insecurities. Insecurities he worked hard to hide. He had a history of failed relationships, and those closest to him later revealed a pattern of emotional detachment and avoidance of responsibility when things went wrong. In 2006, Bruce met Sylvia Ortega, a vibrant and loving woman. She was a mother of 3 from a previous marriage, and her warmth and sense of humor stood in stark contrast to Bruce's more reserved nature. Despite their differences, the two seemed to hit it off. Bruce proposed, and later that year, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony. At first, their life together appeared picture-perfect. Bruce's steady engineering job provided a comfortable lifestyle, and Sylvia brought joy and liveliness into their shared home. Friends and family saw the union as a fresh start for both of them, a blending of 2 worlds into one hopeful future. But marriage, as they say, reveals the truth about people. And for Bruce and Sylvia, the cracks began to show almost immediately. While Sylvia was nurturing and family-oriented, Bruce was distant, reluctant to connect deeply with her children, and rigid in his expectations. From the outside, the couple still seemed happy. But behind closed doors, disagreements over finances, parenting, and unresolved issues from Bruce's past began to take their toll. It was the start of a storm that no one could see coming, a storm that would one day erupt in unspeakable violence. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo seemed on the surface like an ordinary man. An electrical engineer by trade, he was described by acquaintances as quiet, reserved, and intelligent. In 2006, Bruce married Sylvia Ortega, a warm and outgoing woman who brought her own children from a previous marriage into the relationship. Their union appeared happy to outsiders, but behind closed doors, cracks were already beginning to show. Bruce's financial habits quickly became a point of contention. He was frugal to a fault, even refusing to contribute to household expenses for Sylvia's children, insisting they weren't his responsibility. Tensions grew as Sylvia realized Bruce had a troubling tendency to withhold information, not just about money, but about his past. During their marriage, Sylvia discovered a secret that Bruce had kept buried. Years earlier, he had a son from another relationship, a child he had abandoned after a tragic accident left the boy permanently disabled. This revelation shattered any trust Sylvia had in Bruce. What else, she wondered, had he hidden from her? The couple's arguments escalated. By mid-2008, their marriage was beyond repair. Sylvia filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The court ordered Bruce to pay Sylvia $1,785 in monthly spousal support, a decision that enraged him. To Bruce, the divorce wasn't just a personal failure. It was a financial catastrophe. His resentment simmered as he saw Sylvia thriving, spending time with her family and seemingly moving on. To make matters worse, Bruce's job at an aerospace company, where he had worked for years, ended abruptly in July 2008. He was fired after allegedly falsifying timesheets. With his income gone, his financial obligations to Sylvia felt like an insurmountable burden. The court eventually suspended his alimony payments due to his unemployment, but the damage to Bruce's ego was already done. As Sylvia finalized the divorce that same year, Bruce appeared to accept the loss on the surface, but beneath the facade of calm, he was stewing in bitterness. Friends noticed his demeanor shifting. He became withdrawn, short-tempered, and erratic. He refused to accept responsibility for his circumstances, blaming Sylvia and her family for what he saw as his downfall. To the Ortega family, Bruce was now little more than a painful chapter in Sylvia's past. But to Bruce, they were symbols of his humiliation and failures, a reminder of everything he had lost. And as the holidays approached, Bruce began to plan. What the Ortega family couldn't have known was that their joyous Christmas Eve gathering would become the backdrop for Bruce's final, unthinkable act of vengeance. It was 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve when Bruce Jeffrey Pardo pulled up to his former in-laws' home in Covina, California. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with festive lights and homes filled with families celebrating the season. But Bruce wasn't there to join in the joy. He had a plan meticulously crafted in the shadows of his anger and despair. Dressed as Santa Claus, Bruce carried a large, neatly wrapped gift. To anyone passing by, it might have seemed like he was bringing a special present to surprise the family, a gesture of goodwill to heal old wounds. But inside that package wasn't a toy, a game, or even a Christmas decoration. It was a homemade flamethrower, a weapon of destruction carefully designed to wreak havoc. Strapped to his body were 4 Nemem semi-automatic handguns, each loaded and ready to fire. These weren't random tools. They were part of a calculated assault. He had spent weeks, if not months, preparing for this night, assembling the tools of his grim mission and rehearsing every chilling detail in his mind. The Ortega family home was alive with the sounds of celebration. The scent of holiday food filled the air, and cheerful voices could be heard through the walls. Inside, nearly 25 family members, spanning 3 generations, were gathered together. They had no idea what was waiting for them on the other side of the door. Bruce approached slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel driveway. He adjusted the white beard of his costume and steadied the large wrapped gift under his arm. He knocked on the door. Inside, an 8-year-old girl, eager to see who had arrived, ran to answer. She opened the door to find Santa Claus standing before her, a sight that must have seemed magical in that fleeting moment. The sound of gunfire silenced the party. For a brief moment, there was nothing but stunned disbelief. Then came the screams. Bruce stepped inside, his face expressionless beneath the jolly red hat. He raised his weapons and began firing indiscriminately, the sounds of bullets ripping through the room blending with cries of terror. Guests scrambled for cover, overturning chairs and tables in a desperate attempt to escape. But Bruce had planned this too well. There was no mercy in his movements, no hesitation as he moved through the home. The holiday decorations, the glowing tree, the carefully wrapped presents, they all became part of the chaos. In a matter of minutes, Bruce had turned a place of joy and family into a scene of utter devastation. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. As the gunfire subsided, Bruce unwrapped his stolen mug of bubbling old cherries and poured him his bottle of premature age. The flamethrower, crude yet devastatingly effective, emerged from the shredded wrapping paper. He sprayed racing fuel across the walls, the furniture, and the floor, the smell of gasoline mixing with the heavy air of smoke and fear. With one flick, he ignited the fuel, and flames erupted, consuming everything in their path. The house was now an inferno, the fire visible for miles as it devoured the Ortega family home. Neighbors, unaware of the horror that had unfolded inside, rushed to call 911, describing the blaze that was quickly spreading through the quiet suburban street. But Bruce Pardo was already gone. He had left behind a house of ashes, a trail of victims, and questions that would haunt the survivors forever. The doorbell rang, and 8-year-old Katrina rushed to answer it. The party was alive with the sound of holiday cheer, and the sight of Santa Claus on the doorstep seemed like the perfect addition to the night. She barely had time to open her mouth to greet him before the first shot rang out. The child fell to the ground, wounded but miraculously still alive. Panic erupted in the Ortega home as Bruce Pardo stepped inside, his Santa suit incongruously paired with the cold steel of a semi-automatic handgun. Without hesitation, he began firing at the party guests, targeting anyone in his path. The once festive living room became a scene of chaos as screams replaced laughter and people scrambled for cover. Pardo moved methodically through the house. Guests attempted to flee, hiding behind furniture or running toward exits, but his aim was relentless. The joyous gathering of nearly 25 family members, united by love and tradition, was now a house of horrors. And just when it seemed like the nightmare couldn't get any worse, Pardo reached for the package he had brought with him. It wasn't a gift. It was a homemade flamethrower concealed in festive wrapping paper. He unwrapped it with chilling calm and began spraying racing fuel throughout the house. The unmistakable smell filled the air, mingling with the acrid tang of gunfire and smoke. Pardo ignited the fuel, and flames roared to life, consuming the home almost instantly. What had taken years to build, family memories, keepsakes, and cherished traditions, was reduced to ashes in minutes. For those who managed to escape, the image of Pardo standing in his flaming Santa suit, weapon in hand, was a sight they would never forget. For others, there was no escape. The attack left a community forever scarred, and a family irreparably broken. This was no accident, no moment of blind rage. It was planned, deliberate, and devastating. When the flames finally subsided, the true extent of the devastation became horrifyingly clear. The Ortega family home, once filled with the laughter and love of 3 generations, was reduced to smoldering ash. What was left was a grim scene of destruction, a stark contrast to the warmth and joy that had filled the house just hours before. 9 lives were lost that night. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, the beloved patriarch and matriarch of the family, who had built their lives on the foundation of love and hard work. Their sons, Charles and James, and their wives, Cherry and Teresa, who had been pillars of support for the family. Alicia Ortiz, the vibrant sister who never missed a chance to make everyone laugh. And Michael Ortiz, just 17 years old, with a future full of promise that would now never be realized. 3 others, including an 8-year-old girl who answered the door and was the first to be shot, managed to escape with injuries. But they would carry the scars, physical and emotional, of that night forever. The house itself was unrecognizable. The fire, fueled by racing fuel from Bruce Pardo's homemade flamethrower, had engulfed the entire structure in minutes. All that remained was a shell of what had once been a home filled with love and memories. The scene was so severe that investigators struggled to piece together the sequence of events within the charred remains. As emergency responders worked through the wreckage, neighbors gathered, their faces etched with disbelief. Covina, a peaceful suburban community, was now the epicenter of one of the most horrific acts of violence in its history. In the days that followed, the smell of smoke lingered in the air, and a deep, unshakable sadness settled over the town. But for the survivors, the nightmare was far from over. Beyond the physical injuries and the loss of loved ones, they were left grappling with an overwhelming question. Why? What could have driven Bruce Pardo, someone they once knew, to orchestrate such a calculated and devastating attack on the very people who had been a part of his life? The answer lay in the weeks and months leading up to that fateful night, a series of events that had quietly unraveled the life of a man who seemed, at least on the surface, to be living the American dream. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo seemed to be living the American dream. A skilled electrical engineer, he had built a career that allowed him to afford a comfortable life. He was known to his neighbors as polite, cheerful, and even charming. To the casual observer, Bruce had everything going for him, until the summer of 2008, when the carefully constructed facade of his life began to crumble. It started with his job. In July of that year, Bruce was abruptly terminated from his position at an aerospace company. The official reason: misconduct. He had been caught falsifying billing hours, a mistake that not only cost him his position, but tarnished his professional reputation. For Bruce, who prided himself on his career, this was more than just a setback. It was a blow to his identity. With his dismissal came the devastating realization of what unemployment meant. Bruce was left scrambling, not just for income, but for answers to the mounting pressure he faced. His divorce from Sylvia Pardo had turned ugly, and the court had ordered him to pay $1,785 per month in spousal support, a sum that was impossible without a steady income. Bruce tried to petition the court to reduce his payments, citing financial hardship. For a man who had once enjoyed financial stability, it was humiliating to admit he was sinking. But the court showed no leniency. The payments stood, and so did Bruce's growing resentment. The loss of his job didn't just jeopardize his financial future. It highlighted the disintegration of his personal life. Adding to his burdens, Bruce was forced to confront the fact that his ex-wife had been granted sole ownership of their dog, a small but deeply personal loss that added salt to the wound. As the months dragged on, Bruce's savings dwindled. He had to rely on borrowed money and the charity of friends to cover even basic expenses. Each unpaid bill, each unopened letter from the court, was a reminder of how far he had fallen. But perhaps the most crushing blow was psychological. Bruce had always seen himself as the successful one, the reliable one. Losing his job and facing public failure didn't just take away his livelihood, it took away his pride. And with no job, no income, and no way to climb out of the financial hole he had fallen into, Bruce began to fixate on something else entirely. His mind turned not toward rebuilding his life, but toward revenge. The unraveling of Bruce Jeffrey Pardo's finances wasn't just the start of his troubles, it was the tipping point. A man who had once been seen as cheerful and composed was now a shell of himself, consumed by anger and desperation. And as the months rolled on, his anger began to manifest in ways no one could have foreseen. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo had a well-paid job as an electrical engineer, a lovely home, and, on the surface, a happy marriage to Sylvia Pardo. But beneath the facade of stability, cracks were beginning to form. Their relationship was crumbling under the weight of secrets, financial strain, and irreconcilable differences. Sylvia, who had 3 children from a previous relationship, entered the marriage with the hope of blending her family with Bruce's life. But Bruce had little interest in supporting her children, often refusing to contribute to even basic expenses for them. This refusal became a constant point of contention. Sylvia eventually discovered that Bruce was hiding far more than just his unwillingness to support her family. During their divorce proceedings, Sylvia learned of Bruce's past, one he had kept carefully hidden. Years earlier, Bruce had fathered a child, a boy named Matthew, with a former girlfriend. The child suffered a tragic accident that left him with permanent brain damage, requiring lifelong care. Instead of stepping up as a father, Bruce abandoned the child and his former partner, leaving them to navigate the hardships alone. He never paid for Matthew's care, never visited, and never even mentioned him to Sylvia. This revelation was a turning point. Sylvia felt betrayed, not just by Bruce's actions, but by the man she thought she knew. The man who had seemed so reliable and loving had a history of neglect and abandonment. As the court proceedings continued, Sylvia's attorneys pushed for spousal support, arguing that Bruce's income was more than sufficient to cover alimony. The court agreed, ordering Bruce to pay $1,785 a month to Sylvia. For Bruce, the alimony ruling was more than just a financial burden. It felt like a personal attack, a humiliation he couldn't tolerate. His job at ITT, Electronic Systems, had been his anchor, but he was terminated in July 2008 after billing irregularities came to light. Without steady income, the alimony became a weight that he saw as unfair and insurmountable. In his mind, it was Sylvia's fault that his life was falling apart. As the months dragged on, Bruce's resentment grew. He stopped making payments, claiming financial hardship, and refused to attend mandatory court hearings. To Sylvia and her attorneys, it was clear he was spiraling deeper into anger and denial. But what no one knew was just how far that anger would push him, or the horrors he was planning in silence. In the months leading up to that fateful Christmas Eve, Bruce Jeffrey Pardo's life had begun to unravel. To outsiders, he seemed like an ordinary man, quiet, somewhat reserved, with a steady job as an electrical engineer. But beneath that exterior lay a man grappling with mounting personal failures and a mind teetering on the edge. Bruce's marriage to Sylvia Pardo had fallen apart, and their divorce had taken a heavy toll. Sylvia had accused Bruce of being emotionally distant, unfaithful, and unwilling to support her children from a previous relationship. The court proceedings painted a damning picture of a man struggling to keep his life in order. To make matters worse, Bruce had recently been fired from his job after being caught falsifying hours on his timesheets. It was a blow not only to his finances, but to his pride. The weight of financial obligations, alimony payments of nearly $1,800 a month, further crushed him. Bruce, who had once owned a beautiful home and lived comfortably, was now living with his elderly mother, the walls of his life closing in. Friends and family noticed changes in his demeanor. He became more withdrawn, avoiding social gatherings and refusing to discuss his problems. Adding to his isolation was a secret he had carried for years. A son he had abandoned after the child suffered a catastrophic accident that left him permanently disabled. The guilt, compounded by his crumbling life, may have fed into a growing sense of despair. Bruce was no longer the man he pretended to be. He was unraveling. Psychiatrists often talk about the tipping point, the moment when an individual under immense stress can no longer cope. For Bruce, that tipping point seemed to come when the divorce was finalized in late 2008, just weeks before Christmas. He lost everything he valued: his wife, his stepchildren, his home, his career, and the facade of normalcy he had worked so hard to maintain. Bruce Pardo became a man consumed by bitterness, resentment, and revenge. He spent his days meticulously planning what he would later execute with chilling precision. But why Christmas? Why his former in-laws' holiday celebration? Was it rage against his ex-wife? A twisted desire to reclaim control? Or was it simply the one moment he knew they would all be together, vulnerable and unsuspecting? What we do know is this: the psychological storm brewing within Bruce Pardo didn't just destroy him, it destroyed an entire family. As the chaos inside the Ortega family home raged, Bruce Pardo's escape plan was already in motion, a plan meticulously crafted to cover his tracks and throw authorities off his trail. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. Pardo had spent weeks, possibly months, preparing for what he believed would be a clean getaway. In the weeks leading up to that fateful night, Pardo had rented a second car, a compact Dodge Caliber, which he strategically parked near his brother's home in Sylmar, nearly 40 miles from Covina. This vehicle was more than just a means of transportation. It was rigged with explosives. Authorities would later discover that the car was equipped with remnants of a booby trap, designed to detonate upon tampering, a final act of destruction in case anyone got too close. But something didn't go as planned. During the attack, Pardo's homemade flamethrower malfunctioned, and the flames he set inside the house didn't just consume the Ortega residence, they also engulfed him. Third-degree burns seared into his arms and face, an injury that likely derailed his escape and forced him to reconsider his next move. Instead of fleeing to Illinois as planned, Pardo retreated to his brother's house in Sylmar. It was here, surrounded by the remnants of his preparations, that Pardo took his own life with a single gunshot to the head. The escape plan that had seemed so foolproof was abandoned, left in the wreckage of his own guilt, or perhaps the weight of his injuries. When investigators arrived, they uncovered the layers of Pardo's planning. The rented car, rigged with explosives, was a chilling testament to the lengths he was willing to go. The cash strapped to his body revealed his intent to vanish without a trace. Every detail pointed to a man who thought he could commit an unthinkable act and walk away from it. But in the end, Bruce Pardo's meticulous escape plan was as flawed as the man who devised it. Another chapter in a story of heartbreak, destruction, and unfulfilled vengeance. The man in the Santa suit had unleashed devastation on the Ortega family that Christmas Eve, leaving behind a trail of destruction and an unbearable silence where laughter had once been. As flames consumed the house and emergency responders rushed to the scene, Bruce Pardo quietly slipped into the night. Hours later, authorities would find him at his brother's home in Sylmar, California. The rented Dodge Caliber he drove was parked outside, rigged with explosive materials, a testament to the chilling level of planning that had gone into the night's events. But inside the house, Bruce Pardo lay lifeless, the perpetrator of one of California's most horrifying crimes brought to an abrupt end, not by law enforcement, but by his own hand. It was a single gunshot wound that silenced him forever. In death, Bruce left more questions than answers. Investigators sifted through his life and plans, uncovering his meticulous preparation and a deeper web of despair. But his ultimate act, the taking of his own life, meant that many of those questions, what truly drove him to this moment, what was going through his mind in the final hours, would remain unanswered, haunting those left to piece together the shards of his shattered family and community. The discovery of his body brought no relief, no justice, only the heavy finality of a story that had ended in complete tragedy. Victims. Names and brief backgrounds of the 9 deceased family members. 1. Sylvia Ortega Pardo, 43 years old. Sylvia was Bruce Pardo's ex-wife and the center of the divorce proceedings that had escalated in the months leading up to the tragedy. A mother of 3 from a previous relationship, she was described as loving and devoted, always prioritizing her children and her close-knit family. Sylvia was celebrating the holiday with her parents and siblings when the massacre occurred. 2. Alicia Sotomayor Ortega, 70-year-old Mother Ortega. Known for her warmth and generosity, she often hosted family gatherings at her home, which was where the events of that fateful night unfolded. Alicia was a cherished figure in her family and community, always eager to bring everyone together. 3. Joseph S. Ortega, 79 years old. Joseph, Sylvia's father and Alicia's husband, was a beloved patriarch of the family. Retired and enjoying his golden years, he loved being surrounded by his children and grandchildren, particularly during the holidays. His kindness and devotion to his family were central to his identity. 4. Charles Ortega, 50 years old, was known for his sense of humor and his protective nature toward his family. He and his wife Sherry were actively involved in their community and deeply committed to raising their children in a loving and supportive environment. 5. Sherry Lynn Ortega, 45 years old. Sherry, Charles's wife, was described as a compassionate and dedicated mother. She shared her husband's love for family traditions and was a pillar of strength for her children. Sherry's close relationship with her in-laws made her a cherished member of the Ortega family. 6. James Ortega, 52 years old. James, another of Sylvia's brothers, was deeply involved in the family's life and loved spending time with his siblings and nieces and nephews. He was known for his upbeat personality and his role as a supportive older brother. 7. Teresa Ortega, 52 years old. Teresa, James's wife, was deeply loved by her family and admired for her kindness and resilience. She and James were a close couple who often attended family events together and supported one another in every aspect of their lives. 8. Alicia Ortega Ortiz, 46 years old. Alicia, another of Sylvia's sisters, shared her parents' and siblings' love for family and tradition. Known for her outgoing and caring nature, she brought joy and connection to everyone she encountered. She and her brother Felix II of later Ortega grew up in the family's encounter. 9. Michael Andre Ortiz, 17 years old. Michael, Sylvia's nephew and Alicia's son, was a bright and promising teenager with his whole life ahead of him. He was deeply loved by his family and friends, who described him as kind, ambitious, and full of potential. His loss was a devastating blow to all who knew him. These 9 individuals, bound by love and family, were taken in a tragedy that stunned the nation. Their lives, filled with joy and meaning, were celebrated by a mourning community that struggled to comprehend the loss of an entire generation in one horrific night. In the days that followed the massacre, the tight-knit community of Covina struggled to comprehend the horror that had unfolded on Christmas Eve. The Ortega family home, once a beacon of holiday cheer, now stood as a charred reminder of the unthinkable violence that had claimed 9 lives. The tragedy left not just a physical void, but an emotional wound that would take years to heal. The funerals were heart-wrenching. Rows of mourners gathered to pay their respects to a family that had been so integral to the neighborhood. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, the family's patriarch and matriarch, were remembered as kind, hard-working immigrants who had built a loving home and raised their children with a strong sense of community and family values. One by one, the victims were eulogized, each story more devastating than the last. For the 15 children left orphaned or without one parent, the loss was incomprehensible. Some of these children had witnessed the attack firsthand, their memories haunted by the chaos and terror of that night. Others woke up to the devastating news that their parents would never come home. They were left not only with grief, but with questions they would carry for the rest of their lives. Why us? Why our family? Covina, a city known for its close-knit neighborhoods and holiday celebrations, rallied in support of the survivors. Vigils were held, and memorials sprang up in front of the Ortega family's home. Strangers left flowers, candles, and notes, expressing their sorrow and solidarity. Churches and community centers organized counseling sessions and fundraisers, aiming to provide both emotional and financial support to the affected families. But the scars ran deep. Many residents admitted they no longer felt safe in their own homes. The idea that such violence could erupt during what should have been a joyful holiday was unsettling. Christmas lights, once symbols of hope and festivity, became painful reminders of the night the community lost its innocence. For the children, the community came together to offer more than just material support. Local organizations set up scholarship funds, and neighbors opened their doors, offering to care for those who had lost their immediate family. Yet, despite the outpouring of love, the healing process was long and arduous. But every Christmas brought back the memories of that fateful night. The tragedy became a story passed down, not just to remember the victims, but as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, and how even in the darkest of times, a community's strength can be its greatest asset. In their grief, the people of Covina found a way to honor the Ortega family by cherishing their own loved ones a little more, by coming together a little stronger, and by vowing never to forget the lives lost on a night meant for peace and joy. The tragic events of the Covina massacre force us to confront the critical role mental health plays in our lives and communities. Bruce Pardo's actions were not just the product of a failed marriage or financial strain. They were the culmination of unaddressed emotional and psychological struggles, warning signs that were missed or dismissed until it was too late. Pardo's escalating frustrations, his loss of employment, the breakdown of his marriage, and the mounting financial pressures were all visible stressors. Yet, beneath the surface, he harbored deep resentment and despair that festered unchecked. These emotions built over months, and while those around him may have noticed changes, they likely didn't realize the extent of his turmoil. This tragedy highlights the necessity of recognizing behavioral warning signs, even when they seem subtle: withdrawal from loved ones, obsessive focus on grievances, uncharacteristic outbursts, or sudden shifts in demeanor. While not every instance of stress or anger leads to violence, these indicators should never be ignored. Equally important is dismantling the stigma around seeking help for mental health. For someone like Bruce Pardo, accessing therapy, support groups, or even confiding in a trusted friend might have provided a critical outlet to process his emotions before they escalated into irreversible actions. Often, those in pain are too ashamed or isolated to reach out, emphasizing the need for a culture that encourages open dialogue and offers accessible resources. The Covina massacre also raises broader societal questions about conflict resolution and the importance of empathy. Could intervention, legal, emotional, or social, have prevented this tragedy? What safeguards could be put in place to detect when someone is nearing a breaking point? This heartbreaking story reminds us of the fragility of human emotions and the profound consequences when mental health is neglected. In honor of the victims, the lesson must be clear. We all share a responsibility to look out for one another, to listen, to notice, and to act when we see someone struggling. Awareness, compassion, and timely intervention might not only save lives, but also prevent unimaginable heartbreak. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more in-depth true crime stories that uncover the human emotions, decisions, and consequences behind these shocking events. What do you think? Are there ways to prevent tragedies like this one? Could this have been stopped? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and together we can explore the lessons behind these heartbreaking tales.